Very much, April. I appreciate it. Hey, everybody. We're going to talk with John today about the Domino's business. And of course, what's been a very, very interesting year for all the brands, not even just ours, but also learn a little bit more about their spirit of innovation and then even how the past year has challenged them and how they've risen to that occasion in some ways. But before we get into that, John, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your path to Domino's, and then what you've done there since you've gotten there in your role today?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Fred. Really, I had somewhat of a non-traditional kind of path that led me to Domino's. I actually was a college dropout, dropped out of college and joined an entrepreneurship accelerator that was extremely kind of experimental and was also kind of crossed paths with the recession. So we learned a lot in that program of just kind of the fundamentals of kind of innovating and coming up with solutions to problems in a unique way, and it really instilled a passion in me around data and technology and those kind of things. But as you got to the point where we realized that funding wouldn't come through, ended up going back to college, finishing things up, and then made my way eventually to a local ad agency where I worked on a variety of clients from travel to retail to financial services. But the majority of that time I spent working on digital video. And this was at a time when, programmatic was coming to its kind of high point, early days, when mobile was changing things. And I think probably most notably when ad fraud was having its awakening. So that experience where, everyone in the industry was asking questions and no one had all the answers, I think really shaped a lot of my approach to digital and understanding that, it's just getting to that next question and kind of that incremental progress in order to come to really strong solutions and, carry that to this day. But while I was at the agency, I came across a position at Domino's where they were bringing their digital media planning and buying in-house. And they had a role open for emerging media evaluation and testing. So it seemed really interesting. And in the interview, they were asking all kinds of questions that, got me chomping at the bit. So I was able to take that job, stayed in that role for about 6 months, and then went over to manage the entirety of the media planning and buying on the digital side of the house. So did that for a couple of years. And then for the past year and a half, I've been more focused on the television side of things, where I get to work with the great folks at Mindshare on figuring out the future of Domino's video and television strategy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And, it's one of the things in the brief time I've worked on the business with you and the company is that spirit of innovation. And it's interesting how you even said how you're able to merge those two passions together from the time you were in school and then to seemingly finding a perfect position with Domino's and what they were looking for. That's it's one of my passions as well, is the innovation in media that we see. And I'm not going to say how long I've been doing this because I don't want to date myself, but it's incredible the growth and the change that I've seen in the industry and the way we interact and do things now. I just couldn't imagine that when I was an assistant planner. And I love bringing that to my clients and to your business as well, but also with the mentality of it needs to make sense for us. One of the things I did notice that, Domino's has an excellent history of just some innovation. Their app, in my opinion, is best in class in use and accuracy. Things like the DXP pizza delivery video, which I told you the other day, I didn't even think was real until I saw one a couple of days ago. And I was like, oh my God, they are real. But even like how you guys found those moments-based innovations with the pothole fixing thing, which, at a glance could have seemed like a gimmick, but it wasn't, because it was actually the way it had so many key touch points to your consumers. I thought was so cool in that it met a need coming out of the winter when potholes are all over the place. And you're able to marry it to how it could affect pizza delivery. So it's something that could have seemed far off came nicely together. But and even just now, I know was the launch of the automated Noro car test in Houston. But could you just give me a little insight, like when you guys come up with innovations or drive for innovations, what is it you're looking to do or learn from those?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we have a set of kind of core values that we try to live by. And one of the kind of key ones is championing our customer. And what that really means is we approach kind of our customer relationship and knowing that every interaction that we have with our customer is a chance to deepen that relationship. And on the flip, that means it's an opportunity to potentially damage that relationship. So we take that with a high bar of what we need to do. So really, a lot of what we're focused on is removing friction from the process. It's kind of like the old adage of, if you're planning a wedding or something like that, make sure you have name placements across, because there's this moment where people walk into the room and they're just kind of confused. They feel like they're in middle school and at the cafeteria, like, where do I sit? And we want to kind of avoid those kind of situations. So from our app to the online experiences, we're really always kind of focused on removing that friction and making it easier for the customer to place their order and have an enjoyable experience. Because one of the big innovations that we've had that was small, but I think one of the things that when you talk about working at Domino's, a lot of people always go to is the pizza tracker. Really, that was a customer insight of knowing that there was this kind of arc that happened where people would order a pizza, they're excited, and then they wait. But there was this point of like, all right, is the pizza close? Is it in the oven? Or did they forget about me? And that pizza tracker helped kind of remove that customer tension point. So in everything we're trying to do, we're just trying to make sure that we hold true to that promise to champion our customer and make their experience as best possible. Because on the flip, like when you treat your customers right, they'll do the same back to you.
Oh yeah, and I will certainly admit I'm guilty. Whenever I order, I am watching that thing like a hawk to see how it moves, and it's funny. And I actually saw that was one of the learnings that we saw coming out of the lockdowns with COVID, is how when people were ordering things, they're, regardless what it was, from Amazon, wherever, they're like watching it like a hawk and getting the delivery updates. It almost became like a hobby, which is funny. Which of course leads me to another area which it seems like we just can't escape discussing, and that's COVID and the impact that it's had on everybody's business. It created a lot of challenges for brands, put a lot of brands in uncertain territory. What were some of the things that Domino's saw and learned coming out of the lockdowns and things like that, and as we're beginning to hopefully come out of this with the vaccines?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we had to deal with, the same problems that everyone had to deal with people working from home, and how do you, get Skype to work and all those kind of things. But I would say a lot of our issues that we had to overcome quickly was understanding how do you best serve the customer. We already had a very strong focus on food safety and those kind of areas of the business. We clearly had a path for electronic ordering. We clearly had a delivery service, which put us in a better position than a lot of companies going into the pandemic. But when we kind of operationally dealt with things, we had to kind of observe and understand what people felt comfortable with, how to create situations where, again, that friction's removed. So one of the early innovations that we came up with was the pizza pedestal. It was basically just a piece of cardboard to sit the pizza on, so you didn't have to have contact with the delivery driver, and everyone felt safe. Typically an operational change like that, could take months or years, and that happened pretty quickly. And I think the biggest thing that we learned, even through having to change our spots on TV and having to create new spots and having to do those virtually, is we realized that we can move at a pace faster than we thought was possible. And I think ingrained in how we think, we understand that if you're able to iterate, if you're able to iterate faster than the competition, chances are you're going to win. If you can make 10 iterations in the course that someone else makes 5, it's pretty clear kind of who can get to the end path. Every iteration doesn't need to be perfect, but every iteration gets you closer to perfection.
Yeah, and I think also when we were chatting the other day, you had mentioned what seemed somewhat perfect in timing was how we're starting to push more towards car side delivery, which is inherently not something people think of when it comes to Domino's. You think it's the car coming to you, but was there an innovation, a thought process that got you to, hey, we should kind of push for car side delivery even before COVID happened?
Absolutely. It's strange kind of how the timing happened around there, because this was years in the work. I mean, we understood that there was a pain point for customers. We understand that there's some people who prefer delivery. There's some people who prefer carryout. And some of those people who prefer carryout don't necessarily want to get out of their car, and whether they're, a single mom who has a kid in the back seat, and just imagine how much work it is to get out of the car and walk to the door versus having someone walk that out to you. And we saw that Carside delivery was an opportunity, and kind of we're always just kind of looking for those opportunities to make the customer experience better. And it just so happened that we're at the point to kind of put this out there at a large scale, and the necessity for it became very apparent. And I think just kind of those approaches to always trying to solve a customer problem, whether it is a necessity or not, if it's just the best thing to do, you usually get rewarded for that. And I think that just kind of goes through a lot of things that we've done, like, going back to, having those best in class kind of online experiences and really focusing in on delivery and fast delivery and all those kind of things. Every company is starting to look at those and realize the importance of it. But it's just kind of staying ahead of that, because if you're a company who's just kind of looking at Carside delivery now, you're a few steps behind, but it's still the right thing to do. So any of those other things that you can see kind of in the future that customers are going to need or want, it gets you in a better place. And it goes back to kind of what you were saying about neuro. It's the same thing. I think everyone sees a future where autonomous vehicles have a place. But what can we learn today that's going to set us up in a good position to really be able to best serve the customer when that becomes the expected experience?
Yeah, and it's funny again, because it's the theme I'm noticing too, is it's the innovation and the thirst for innovation Domino's has. It's the testing of new things driven around driving positive customer experience, which of course yields that brand ambassador that you have. Because anytime somebody has a wonderful experience with a brand, I know they usually take right to social media, or if there's something cool. And I think it's just funny that, again, Nora, which is the autonomous, self-driving pizza delivery vehicle, when you think about the timing of it, I know this wasn't conceptualized a week or two ago, a month or two ago. This was probably a few years coming, given the technology. But again, just the serendipity of it lining up with COVID, where you're looking with, again, a minimized human interaction in getting your pizza and transacting with somebody like that. It feels a little more safer. So it's very interesting how those two come to play. But I think the other thing I have to imagine is that when we do innovation and things like that, it's also about measuring these things, measuring our campaigns so we can continually, like you said, hit upon that customer delight. There's a lot of new data privacy laws coming in place. It started with the initial wave of a year and a half ago, 2 years ago with GDPR. And then we saw it with CCPA. And now iOS 14 is coming out with some new privacy and permissions for data and things like that. How do you see that potentially affecting Domino's ability to capture customer data and use it in a beneficial way?
I think in the short term, it's going to be painful. In the long term, it's probably the best thing for the industry at a whole. It's one of those things, change is always difficult in the short term. And as an industry, no one wants to talk about building a tunnel when the bridge works fine. As soon as the bridge goes out, everybody wants to talk about building that tunnel. And I think we've had multiple points when you talk about GDPR, everyone's like, hey, that bridge might be breaking. CCPA, Safari ITP, and now iOS 14. I think we've had enough warning shots that we need to really take this seriously and start to think about what is that best solution for not only advertisers to be able to retarget users, based upon their site activity, but also give customers and consumers in a broad sense the privacy that they need and what's to be expected. Because you think about privacy in the early 90s or early 2000s on the internet, you didn't really care. And I even think about, the way that, you would put stuff online in 2005 without thinking about it. You're like, oh, my parents aren't on Facebook, I don't care. But now everything that you put out there, you understand that it's going to have a life of its own. And I think it's fundamentally changing how we need to think about, how do we best serve everyone so we don't put anyone in bad situations. And I think the emergence of blockchain and that convergence with media is probably a huge opportunity for that. I think as cryptocurrency becomes more mainstream and people just kind of understand the concepts around it, more and more people in media will understand how applicable it is to where we are right now. when it comes to being able to make transactions, but do those more anonymously.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how it affects everything we do, the level of data that we get, and the importance of that data, so we can drive forward meaningful interactions with our consumers every day. Do you see that affecting us? So, like, one area where I know the industry is starting to go towards now, and as you mentioned, your focus is predominantly in the TV campaign, which is a massive thing. It's by no means a small part of what we do. But it brings me to the conversation of the ratings erosions we're seeing in TV, and the concerns and potential feelings about that, as well as the shift to other venues, be it in digital or digital video more directly. How do you feel that the changes in these data policies might affect moving to something like a heavier video or digital campaigns?
I think, again, it's one of those things where we all need to very seriously kind of start having conversations about pushing everyone outside of their comfort zone, whether that's brands or measurement partners or publishers themselves, and agencies, everyone in the ecosystem, because there's organizations like SIMS who are really focused on figuring out ways to do a centralized measurement and things like that. I think that's what we're going to need, is some sort of ability to measure things centrally, because as long as there's this confusion point between a television impression and a digital impression, whether that's video or whatever it might be, I think it's just opportunity for people to buy things that they don't necessarily want or understand the difference. Because I would say, I always talk to people when we talk about digital versus TV. And TV, you put one spot out there, 1 million people see it. Digital, you put one spot out there, one person sees it. The inherent value of those are very different, and we need to be able to account for those in similar ways.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting landscape moving forward. And then just real quickly before we head over to the Q&A, because I see we have about 6 questions teed up here. What media trends excite you the most coming into 2021? And as we are already beginning to talk about 2022, crazily enough.
Yeah, I think centralized measurement, definitely. I think the unsung hero that we'll probably see in the next few years is going to be what happens with privacy and identity and blockchain. Because even as we're working, I think as people work through kind of these privacy policies and stronger government intervention, you start to realize, in order to enforce these things, you need some sort of identity to make sure that you don't collect people's data and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately, when it comes to like TV, I think we are at a point where we've been talking about it for so long that digital video and over the top is going to take over and going to be the place where things are at.
Yeah.
COVID put that on an accelerated path. So I think we're at a point where it's becoming a reality of the importance of digital video in everyone's media plans.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how the pandemic accelerated that, almost put afterburners on that. To me, one of the cooler things coming out of that was something that I don't think a lot of people expected, was how the 50+ audience, their use of it almost doubled. The way they adapted to it very, very quickly has been nothing short of incredible, and I think has helped speed that along. But thank you this was a great conversation. I want to get over to some of the questions that we have.
Great.
One of the questions, which I think is a great question, is how do you plan on adjusting marketing strategies in the coming months as more and more consumers are returning to restaurants and the capacity begins to open up?
That's a really good question. I think strategy, we stay the course, and it's kind of where I get back to when we were talking about the Fireside delivery and things like that. We have a long-term view of our business because we understand that those long-term infrastructure builds are going to be more sustainable and beneficial in the long run than kind of short-term kind of gimmicks and things like that. I think the interesting thing to that point is none of us know at this point how long the COVID hangover is going to last. I think there's a lot of people who didn't order delivery before, or didn't order, most of their food delivered, or would go out, who might prefer it now. And there's a lot of people who used to go to the movies who bought a 70-inch TV and prefer to watch movies at home now. And how long, yeah, I have very little interest in going to movie theaters at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how long that's going to be that way. And maybe it changes over time, but I think there's going to be some fundamental changes in consumer behavior that we don't see for some time now, that it might be biased towards staying at home.
Okay. No, that's so true. I think it's going to be very interesting to see, not just within eating, but just in general, sporting events, concerts, putting your hand in a bowling ball that you don't own anymore, like all these things you never thought about, that could change the way that works.
Yeah.
Also have another question. What is Domino's approach to partnerships with influencer publishing or other companies? So for example, Epics. Typically, what are the objectives that are looking to be fulfilled here versus other partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to oversimplify it, but it's the truest sense of it. Since we are a franchisee organization, the dollars that we spend are those franchisees' dollars to help drive sales. It's to help put their kids through college, to help pay their mortgage. So we are really focused on driving a measurable return on our investment for everything that we do from a marketing standpoint. So we need to be able to measure things, and we need to be able to show that it's actually providing tangible benefit to a franchisee in order for us to approach it. And that goes from spots and dots to any kind of partnerships we do.
Cool. Looks like we have time probably for a couple more. Here's more of a general one. In what ways is Domino's looking to stand out in the eye of consumers?
Whew, wow, that's a really good question. How do we want to stand out in the eye of consumers? I think, really we want to be, transparency is a big piece for us, because going back to that pizza turnaround and really being transparent to consumers. I think that may be the biggest one, of really being transparent and making sure that we keep the customer's best interest as a primary.
Yep. And then somebody else had asked, which I think is interesting too. It's so working from home and distancing have altered consumer media and digital habits in many, many ways. What are you seeing when it comes to those types of behavioral changes, and how do we feel that people are adapting, or consumers are adapting?
So how are consumers adapting to the
change in the routines from working from home and distancing, and how it's changed, the consumer media as well as their digital habits in so many ways?
Yeah, I think overall there's a stronger comfort for things that we're already in the works. I think a lot of the behaviors that we have right now, I mean, when we talk about, watching digital video from home, ordering delivery, all of these things were already in the works of, and we could tell that they were scaling. I think COVID just expedited their scale and may have solidified it a little bit more than a world without COVID.
Cool. I think those were most of the questions that we had. So I just have a couple of others for you. One, which of course, in any topic bearing, in any conversation about pizza, the question that must be asked is, are you okay with pineapple on pizza, or is that a no for you?
I am absolutely no. Like I understand some people enjoy pineapple or pizza. I just don't understand why.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I understand the potential to savory and sweet, but I guess I'm a traditional pizza guy. It's the cheese, the sauce, and your traditional meat toppings, but that's just me. So
same thing. Yeah.
Nope, I think we just got another question in. Let's see. This is an interesting one. We can't have a conversation like this, discuss innovation without covering Gen Z. What could heritage brands learn from newer digital first brands when it comes to authentically marketing to Gen Z?
That's a really good question. I think that heritage brands need to pay attention and make sure that I think really it's the listening. It's the same values that you have for any other demographic. I remember the millennial conversation, that was happening, 10 years ago. And I think it's the same thing of just really paying attention, having a pulse, and not trying to force your will on your customers. It's really understanding where you can help them. And I think the brands that continue to kind of listen and sometimes follow the lead of people who are more attuned to Gen Z will be successful.
Okay, and then I have one last question for you. Which does go back to the trends in consumer behavior that we're seeing and the shift in what we've seen. Of those trends that we've seen, be it the shift to heavier video consumption, digital interaction, and things like that, which ones of those trends do you think will be the most important for Domino's in moving forward in 21 and 22 and beyond?
So when it comes to 2021, I think definitely kind of video trends are going to be there. And I think really, I don't think anyone can avoid the iOS 14 conversation. I think for every brand, that's probably going to be one of the biggest ones, because whether it has an immediate strong impact or it's going to have a strong impact in the coming years, it's stuff that you have to plan for and have to start getting solutions for. And like I was saying before, I just hope that as an industry, we can start to work more together and figure out solutions rather than everyone kind of being every man for himself when it comes to finding solutions to some of these problems. Because especially we're at a point where, Facebook is out there asking for government regulation. There's going to be some probably regulation that happens with Google and Amazon and all these other folks that are out there. And the question is, do we want, someone in Washington who has to ask the question, how do you make money when you don't sell a product? Or do we think that, folks who work in this every day in and day out may have some better solutions? And I think it's the latter. It's just whose hand's going to be forced, and if we don't act, it's going to be government's hands.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that develops moving forward. And I was even reading an article where it's not just how it affects brands from our perspective, but it also brands in terms of our partners' perspectives. And their ability to capture data and work with us on that. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that affects us all moving forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's all the stakeholders have something that they need to bring to the table.
Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen. I actually would love to chime in with one question of my own. I'm just going to be selfish because we have a couple of minutes. But John, so you talked about this idea of removing friction to provide the best consumer experience possible. And then you also talked a little bit about this idea of needing sort of standardized, centralized measurement. To me, that's friction in the industry for us, right? We all have different ways of measuring. There's different standards just based on who's doing what or who owns what. So I would love to hear just a little bit more about how you guys approach measurement and understanding how to tie all of the things that you do to streamline your own efforts and understanding what the business impact is of all of kind of your efforts. Yeah,
I would say one of our biggest pieces to get holistic measurement is a media mix modeling and understanding kind of the time series impact of our media. So I think that's kind of how we get that holistic. But I think I'm a strong believer personally, and I try to kind of preach internally and to folks externally, is that media in a lot of ways just still comes down to reach, frequency, and spend. And those are metrics that every partner generally has some sort of concept of. And I think it's just us as an industry getting to a point where we can count the same way. And there is some sort of standardized method of measuring that overlap and things like that. Because once we're there, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of distractions in the industry, especially on the digital side. I mean, you can talk about completion rates and all these kind of things, but it's like I would rather know how many times someone saw my ad than if they saw 75% versus 85% of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So given just kind of everything that's happened over the last year, what do you think will be the biggest changes in your media strategy for next year?
That's a really good question. One of the things that just organizationally, we've had some restructuring over the past year, or maybe a year and a half at this point, where both our digital and our television lead up through the same org. They used to be kind of in separate orgs. One was more of a marketing org, one was more of a digital org. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we're going to continue to double down on, is these worlds are converging. Like, what's that middle ground and how do we connect these dots? It's the same kind of conversation of how do you get that better measurement, is how do we get that better measurement internally, and then have conversations with our partners on helping us improve that as well.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's almost like a challenge that's experienced on both the brand and the agency side, is just the working in silos means, you're not really leveraging the synergies of all of the work together, because they're not all really speaking together or connected in a way for you to be able to do it, even if you wanted to do it. So I think that's super important to start figuring out. The other thing I was curious about, because you are well known for sort of being an innovator and really a tech company, for everything that you do. Do you, in terms of teams, speaking of silos, but also speaking of just like empowering innovation within sort of the fabric of everything you do, is there a team that sits at Domino's that solely focuses on innovation and where we're going next? Or is that literally funded within each one of the teams, within each one of those disciplines? Like, how do you guys approach driving a focus on innovation?
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally ingrained into kind of how we think about things. I mean, we innovated, changed our core product, and are still kind of benefiting from some of those tail ends. But we also have teams that are just solely focused on innovation. We have a chief innovation officer who is kind of looking at, innovations in store, innovations to getting things to customers. And even in the marketing side, we have a team that's really focused on menu innovations and those kind of things. So it is a big focus with specific teams, but and I don't know, especially in the marketing side of the business, there's probably not a single team where innovation is not really at the forefront of how we operate. There's not doing the status. We have a culture of rotation at Domino's too. So if you're in the role for 5 years, that's a pretty long time. So I think inherently that helps foster this idea of innovation, because you come into a new role, you have a limited time to make some sort of impact and then learn as much as you can as well. And I think that really kind of fosters a spirit of innovation where everyone's constantly learning and everyone's constantly bringing new perspective of things.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I know, and it almost seems like different industries do it differently. CPGs tend to have a lot of kind of innovation hubs or centers of excellence around that, whereas other categories and industries like to distill it across teams, so that it just becomes a focus for everyone. So it's great to hear kind of how you all approach that. And then just one last question, going back to the measurement piece. Do you feel like everything that you're doing is sort of, and I'm even just thinking about the last conversation with Kay Weisen from Kroger, this idea of outcome-based activation. Do you feel like you guys are in a unique position to tie everything back to a business outcome from an exposure standpoint, since a lot of what happens sort of inside of some sort of system like an e-commerce platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that serves us extremely well, and it's a benefit that we've definitely used for ever since we've had these systems in place. The majority of our orders are coming through in e-commerce, and with that comes a better idea of customer behavior, their repeat purchasing patterns, and all those kind of things that we can derive insights to. I think the challenge with all of that comes is, like, there's always more data than people can actually investigate. So it is really kind of prioritizing and then really going deep on those insights, because I think there's always the challenge of trying to just find insights that justify your argument versus finding true insights that may be uncomfortable and may tell you that you've been doing things wrong for years and you need to change. And I think the latter, kind of those insights that really show you that something's broken, are always so much more beneficial. And luckily, we have a very strong analytics and insights team that is really focusing on that. And we know that we can come with bad news, and we know that being able to respond to that bad news ultimately generally has a good outcome.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's almost the other side of the spectrum. You want to remove friction for a very seamless, easy consumer experience, but then you want to lean into the friction on the other end of the spectrum so you can get uncomfortable to drive change and innovation.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely true. We're in the customer service business, and that's our job in the customer service business, is that we do the work so everyone else